She had exactly $20 left to her name, one folded, worn-out bill standing between her little girl and an empty table. The rent was past due, the heat was nearly gone, and she had promised herself she would not spend a single cent of it. Then, on the coldest night of the year, an old man with frost in his beard looked up at her from a diner booth and whispered, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I have nowhere left to go." And Della Hart did the one thing that made no sense at all. She reached into her pocket, and she gave him everything she had. Stay with me until the very end of this story, because that single act of kindness, given by a woman who had nothing left to give, set something in motion that neither of them could have imagined. By the very next morning, the whole shape of Della Hart's life had begun to change. There is a saying older than any of us, and I have found it true in every corner of my long life. It is easy to be generous when your hands are full. The real measure of a soul is what it does when its hands are all but empty. This is the story of a woman whose hands were as empty as hands can be, and of the astonishing thing she did with the little she had left. I have carried this story with me for a great many years now, and I have told it more times than I can count, because in all my days I have never found a truer one to tell. It is not a story about riches, though there are riches in it. It is a story about the strange and stubborn arithmetic of kindness, how the less a person has to give, the more each gift seems to be worth, and how a single good deed done in the dark, when no one is watching and there is nothing to gain, can echo through a life for years and years. Keep that in your heart as you listen. It matters more than the mansion, more than the money, more than the ending you think you can already see coming. Her name was Della Hart, and if you had passed her on the street in those days, you would not have looked at her twice. She was 34 years old, though the weariness she carried made her seem older. She lived in a small, cold apartment on the edge of a small, cold town, up a narrow staircase above a shuttered shoe store, in a place where the winters came early and stayed long. Every morning she rose before the sun. Every night she came home after her daughter was already asleep. And in between, she worked. Harder, I think, than most people will ever be asked to work in their lives. 2 years before our story begins, Della had lost her husband. His name was Tom, and he had been a good man, a carpenter, steady and kind, the sort who whistled while he worked, and always had a peppermint in his coat pocket for their little girl. But a long illness had taken him, slowly and cruelly, the way it sometimes does, and when it was finally over, it left behind two things: a hole in Della's heart, the exact size and shape of the man she had loved, and a mountain of debt that no widow's wages could hope to climb. So Della did what women like her have always done. She kept going. She took a job waiting tables on the night shift at a little roadside diner called the Bluebird, and when that was not enough, and it was never enough, she took a second job cleaning offices in the early mornings, before the world woke up. She slept in the cracks between. She wore the same 2 coats until the seams gave out, and every single dollar she could scrape together went to the same 3 things, in the same unbending order: keep the roof over Lily's head, keep the heat on as long as she could, and keep food on the table. Lily was 7 years old. She had her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn spirit, and she was, without any exaggeration, the entire reason Della got out of bed each morning. Whatever the world took from Della Hart, and it had taken a great deal, it had not taken Lily, and so long as that was true, Della told herself, she was not truly poor. She had lost her husband and her savings and her sleep, and the soft hands she'd had as a younger woman, but she had her girl, and a woman with her child still beside her is never entirely without a fortune. I would like you to picture what those days were actually like for her, because the word hardship is a small word for a very large thing. It was the arithmetic that never balanced, no matter how many times she ran it, the choosing, every single week, between the heating bill and the grocery bill, between the shoes Lily's growing feet needed and the medicine for the cough that would not quit. It was walking to work in worn-through boots, because a new pair meant a week without something else. It was the pride she swallowed at the food pantry the 2 times things got bad enough that she had no other choice, and the way she made a game of it for Lily so the child would never feel the fear that lived in her mother's chest. It was lying awake doing sums in the dark. Della Hart knew poverty not as an idea, but as a daily companion, one that sat at her table and followed her to work and waited for her when she came home. And yet, And this is the thing I most want you to understand about her. She had never once let it turn her hard. That is the miracle of certain people. The world presses down on them with everything it has, year after year, and instead of growing bitter, they somehow grow softer. Della was one of those. Whatever she went without, she never went without a kind word for a tired customer, or a gentle hand for someone worse off than herself. She had decided, somewhere in the hardest of it, that the one thing poverty would never be allowed to take from her was her tenderness. It was the last thing she owned that no bill collector could touch. I want you to understand something about Della before this story goes on, because everything that follows depends upon it. She was not a saint. She was not a woman with money to spare and a warm feeling to indulge. She was tired down to her bones. She was frightened most nights, in the quiet way that people learn to hide, and on the particular winter night, when this story truly begins, she was closer to the edge of her strength than she had ever been in her life. Because that morning, a white envelope had been slipped under her apartment door, and inside it were words that made her hands go cold. Final notice. The rent was past due. She had until the end of the week to make it right, or she and Lily would have to go. That afternoon, before her shift, Della sat at her small kitchen table and counted her money. She counted it the way you count something when you already know the answer and are only praying the number will change if you count it slowly enough. She emptied her purse. She checked the coffee can on the shelf where she kept her tips. She looked in the pocket of her good coat and the pocket of her work coat and the little dish by the door. And when she had gathered up every last cent she had in the world, it came to $20 and a few coins. $20 against a mountain. She sat there a long while and looked at that single folded bill on the table. It was soft with handling, the way old money gets, and one corner had been torn and taped. It would not pay the rent. It would not pay even a fraction of it, but it would buy a few days of groceries, a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, a little milk for Lily's cereal. It was, in the most literal sense, the difference between her daughter eating that week and not. So Della made herself a promise, sitting at that table. Whatever else happened, whatever the week threw at her, she would not spend that $20 on anything but food for her child. She folded it once more and tucked it deep into the inside pocket of her work coat, where she could feel it against her chest, and she buttoned the coat up tight. Then she kissed her sleeping daughter on the forehead. Lily always fell asleep before Della left for the night shift, and she whispered the same thing she whispered every night. "You're my whole world, baby. I'll see you in the morning." And she went out into the cold to work. The walk to the Bluebird Diner took 20 minutes on a good night. On that night, it took longer, because the coldest weather of the whole year had come rolling down out of the north, and the snow had begun to fall in earnest. Great, heavy flakes that turned the streetlights into soft gold halos and muffled the whole world into silence. By the time Della reached the diner and pushed through the door, stamping the snow from her boots, her cheeks were red and her hands were numb even through her gloves. "There she is," called Gus from behind the counter. Gus owned the Bluebird, a big, gruff, good-hearted man who had given Della the job when no one else would, and who pretended not to notice on the nights she took home an extra roll or two for her girl. "Cold enough for you?" "Cold enough for anybody," Della said, managing a smile as she tied on her apron. "Quiet night?" "Quiet as a church," Gus said, nodding toward the empty booths. "Nobody with any sense is out in this. We'll likely close early." He glanced at her, and something softened in his rough face. "You look tired, Della." "I'm always tired, Gus," she said gently. "It's part of the uniform." She did not tell him about the envelope under her door. She did not tell anyone, because Della Hart had learned, in her 2 hard years, that the world has a limited patience for other people's troubles, and that a woman who wants to keep her dignity learns to carry her burdens quietly. So she picked up her order pad, and she went to work in the nearly empty diner, and she waited for the long, cold night to pass. She had no idea, none at all, that the most important moment of her entire life was about to walk through that door and sit down in the corner booth. It was close to 10 o'clock when the bell over the door jingled. Della looked up from the counter where she'd been folding napkins, and she saw an old man come in out of the storm. He moved slowly, stiffly, the way the cold makes old bones move, and the snow was thick on the shoulders of his thin coat. Far too thin a coat, she noticed at once, for a night like this. He had frost in his gray beard, and a knit cap pulled down low, and he carried no bag, no umbrella, nothing at all. He simply stood a moment inside the door, blinking against the warm light, as though he had forgotten what warmth felt like. Then he made his way to the corner booth, lowered himself down onto the seat with a small sigh, and folded his reddened hands together on the table. Della brought him a menu and a glass of water. "Evening," she said kindly. "Cold one out there. Can I get you some coffee to start? On the house. Nobody should come in from that without something hot." The old man looked up at her, and she saw that his eyes were a pale, tired blue, and that there was something in them she recognized, because she had seen it in her own mirror often enough. It was the particular look of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, all alone. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Coffee would be a kindness." She brought it steaming, and he wrapped both hands around the cup as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and he did not drink it right away. He only held it, letting the heat seep into his frozen fingers. Della went back to her napkins, but she kept an eye on him, the way she'd learned to keep an eye on things, and after a few minutes, she noticed that he had not opened the menu at all. He was only sitting there, staring at the tabletop, and there was a stillness about him that worried her. She went back over. "Have you had a chance to look?" she asked gently. "The meatloaf's good tonight. Gus makes it himself." The old man was quiet for a long moment, and then he did something that she would remember for the rest of her days. He looked up at her, and his face was full of a quiet shame that no person should ever have to wear, and he said, very softly, so that no one else could hear, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't order anything. I lost my wallet earlier tonight. My car broke down on the highway some miles back, and when I went to call for help, I found my billfold was gone. I've been walking a good while. I only came in to get out of the cold for a few minutes, and I'll be on my way, I promise. I didn't mean to take up your table. I have nowhere left to go tonight, and I didn't know where else to stop." And then this proud old man, who was clearly not accustomed to asking anyone for anything, lowered his eyes back to the table, unable to hold her gaze. Now, I want you to picture this scene the way Della saw it. An old man, frozen half through, with no wallet and no car and nowhere to go, on the coldest night of the year, sitting in an empty diner too ashamed to ask for help. And Della Hart, standing over him in her worn apron, with exactly $20 in the pocket over her heart. $20 she had sworn on her daughter's life she would not spend. I have thought about the next few minutes of this story more than almost any other, in all the years I have been telling it, because those few minutes are where the whole thing turned. Della could have done what almost anyone would have done, and no one would have blamed her for it. She could have brought the old man another cup of coffee, said a few kind words, and let him warm himself and move along. She had her own troubles, after all, troubles bigger than a stranger's. She had a little girl at home, and an eviction notice under her door, and $20 between them and hunger. By any measure the world uses, she had nothing left to give. She had already given everything she had to simply staying alive. But Della Hart looked at that old man, and she could not walk past him. Later, when people asked her why, she was never quite able to explain it. She would only say that she looked at him sitting there, so cold and so alone and so ashamed, and she thought of her own Tom in his last months, how a proud man hates to be a burden, how it can hurt worse than the cold itself, and she thought that somewhere, maybe, this old man had people who loved him and were worried sick about him that very night, and she thought that if it were ever her father, or her Tom, or someday her own Lily, stranded and freezing in a strange town, she would pray to God that some tired stranger would choose to see them. So she made her decision, and it was not an easy one. It was, I think, one of the hardest and bravest decisions a person can make, to give away the little you have when you have almost nothing left. I want to be honest about the war that went on inside her in that moment, because it would do her no justice to pretend it was simple. A voice in her, a sensible, frightened, entirely reasonable voice, was crying out, "That $20 is Lily's breakfast. That is the bread and the milk. You have a child at home, and an eviction notice under your door, and you do not have the right to be generous. Charity begins at home. Look after your own." And that voice was not wrong, exactly. That voice was the voice of every hard year she had survived, and it had kept her and her daughter alive. She did not dismiss it lightly. But there was another voice, quieter and deeper, underneath. And that voice asked her a simple question. If you let this old man walk back out into that storm because you were afraid, what kind of woman do you become? And what kind of woman does Lily learn to be? And to that question, Della Hart found she had only one answer she could live with. You sit right there, she told the old man, and her voice was warm and firm, the voice of a woman who has made up her mind. You're not going anywhere in that storm, and you're not sitting in my diner with an empty stomach either, not on my watch. She went to the kitchen, and she told Gus the meatloaf special was for the gentleman in the corner, and Gus, bless him, asked no questions and piled the plate high. She brought it out to the old man, hot meatloaf and mashed potatoes and green beans and 2 thick slices of bread and butter, and she set it down in front of him with a cup of fresh coffee. But ma'am, he began, I told you, I can't. You can, and you will, Della said gently. It's already paid for. Now eat, before it gets cold. The old man looked down at that plate of hot food, and then he looked up at her, and his pale blue eyes filled. He did not say anything for a moment, because I don't think he could, and then he bowed his head, and he ate, slowly at first, and then with the quiet, grateful hunger of a man who has not eaten all day. Della let him eat in peace, and while he ate, she did the thing she had sworn she would never do. She reached into the inside pocket of her work coat, and she took out the folded, taped, worn soft $20 bill, the only money she had in all the world, the bread and milk for her daughter's week. And when the old man had finished his meal and was gathering himself to face the cold again, she pressed it quietly into his hand. This is for you, she said, closing his cold fingers around it. There's a motel about a half-mile up the road, the Twilight. It's not fancy, but it's warm and it's cheap. And this'll cover a room for the night. You are not sleeping out in this weather. Do you hear me? In the morning, you can call someone about your car and about your wallet. But tonight, you're going to be warm and safe. That's all there is to it. The old man stared at the money in his hand. Then he stared at her. Ma'am, he said, and his voice was rough. I can't take this. I can see this is not money you have to spare. I can't. It wouldn't be right. It's already done, Della said simply. Please, it would ease my heart to know you're not out in the cold. That's worth more to me than $20. And she smiled at him, a real smile, tired and kind. Go on now, get yourself warm. The old man's hand closed around the bill, and he looked at Della Hart for a long, long moment, as if he were trying to memorize her face. What is your name? He asked her quietly. Della, she said. Della Hart. Della Hart, he repeated, as though it were something worth remembering. My name is Elias, and I will not forget this. As long as I live, I will not forget what you did for me tonight. Then he stood, and he pulled his thin coat tight, and he walked back out into the storm. And Della watched him go through the frosted window, a small, stooped figure disappearing into the falling snow, and she felt, all at once, both lighter than she had felt in months, and heavier too, because she knew what she had just given away. She had $20 and a mountain that morning. Now she had only the mountain. The diner closed early that night, just as Gus had said it would. Della walked home through the deep, silent snow, and the whole way, a small, frightened voice in the back of her mind kept asking the same question, over and over. What have you done? What are you going to feed Lily now? She did not have an answer. She only had the certainty, deep down beneath the fear, that she could not have done otherwise. Some things a person simply cannot walk past and still be the person they want their child to grow up to be. She let herself into the cold little apartment above the shoe store. As quietly as she could, she hung up her snow-heavy coat, and she went to the small room where her daughter slept, and she stood in the doorway a while, just looking at her. Lily lay curled beneath 2 blankets in her father's old flannel shirt, which she had claimed as her own after he passed and refused to sleep without. Her dark hair was spread across the pillow, and her small face was peaceful in sleep, and she was, to Della, the most beautiful thing that had ever existed or ever would. Della sat down softly on the edge of the bed, and she brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek, and the tears she had been holding back all the long walk home finally came, quietly, so as not to wake the child. She was not crying because she regretted what she had done. She wanted to be very clear with herself about that, even then. She was crying because she was so tired, and so afraid, and because she loved this sleeping girl so much that the thought of not being able to provide for her felt like a hand around her throat. She was crying the way strong people cry, when they have been strong for far, far too long, and there is finally no one watching. Lily stirred, and half woke, and blinked up at her mother in the dark. "Mama?" she murmured. "Are you home?" "I'm home, baby," Della whispered, wiping her eyes quickly. "Go back to sleep. Did you have a good night at work?" Della looked at her daughter's sleepy, trusting face, and she made herself smile. "I did," she said softly. "I helped somebody who needed it." "That always makes for a good night." Lily smiled without fully waking. "That's good, Mama," she mumbled. "You always help people." And she drifted back down into sleep, holding her father's flannel shirt against her chest. "You always help people." Della sat there in the dark long after her daughter's breathing had gone slow and even, turning those 4 small words over in her heart. Her 7-year-old girl had said them so simply, so certainly, as though it were just a plain fact about the world, the way you'd say the sky is blue or the snow is cold. You always help people. And Della realized, sitting there, that whatever her daughter grew up to be, whatever hard roads lay ahead of them both, at least she had given the child that. At least Lily would grow up knowing, all the way down to her bones, that when you have the chance to be kind to someone who is suffering, you take it, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. It was not a fortune she could leave her daughter, but it was something. It might, she thought, be the only thing that truly mattered. She thought, too, of Tom that night, of the man who had first taught her that lesson, back when they were young and had nothing but each other. Tom had been the kind of man who would give a stranded traveler the coat off his own back, who tipped the waitress double when the diner was empty because somebody ought to, who could never pass a person in need without stopping. In the lean early years of their marriage, it had sometimes exasperated her. More than once, she had scolded him, gently, for giving away money they did not have, and he would only smile that easy smile of his and say, "Della, honey, we'll never miss it. And you never know. You just never know." She had buried him 2 years ago, but she had not buried the man's heart. She had gone on carrying it and passing it down, without even quite realizing it, to the little girl now asleep with his flannel shirt held tight against her chest. In giving away that $20, Della understood she had not betrayed her family. She had honored it. She had done exactly what Tom would have done. You just never know. She did not sleep much that night. She lay awake in the cold, listening to the storm, and she prayed the kind of plain, worn-out prayers that tired people pray. And she had no way of knowing, no way in the world, that even as she lay there afraid, the answer to those prayers was already asleep in a small, warm room at the Twilight Motel, a half-mile up the road, clutching a torn and taped $20 bill in his hand, and thinking of her. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the world was buried in clean white snow, and the sun came up cold and brilliant over the little town. Della was up before dawn, as always, though her heart was heavy. She had no money for groceries now, and she did not know what she would do. She was standing at her small kitchen window, watching the sun come up over the rooftops and trying to think of some way, any way, to make it through the week, when there came a knock at her door. She was not expecting anyone. For a cold moment she thought it might be the landlord, come about the rent, and her stomach clenched. But when she opened the door, it was not the landlord. It was the old man from the diner, Elias. Except he did not look quite the way he had looked the night before. His thin coat and his frost and his weariness were gone. He stood on her landing in a fine, heavy wool overcoat, clean-shaven now and rested, and behind him at the curb sat a long, dark car with a driver waiting at the wheel. He held his hat in his hands, and there was a gentleness in his pale blue eyes, and beside him stood a younger man in a suit holding a leather folder. Della stared at him, utterly bewildered. "Elias?" she said. "What? How did you find me? Are you all right? Did you get your car sorted? And your wallet?" The old man smiled, and it was a warm smile, but there was something behind it, something careful, and a little bit sorrowful, and full of a feeling she could not yet name. "Mrs. Hart," he said, "may I come in? There is a great deal I need to tell you, and I owe you the truth, all of it, before anything else." Della stepped back and let him in, too astonished to do anything else. He came into her small, cold, tidy apartment, and he looked around it slowly, at the worn but spotless furniture, at the child's drawings taped to the walls, at the single photograph of a smiling man in a carpenter's apron on the shelf, and something moved across his face. "Please," Della said, gathering herself. "Sit down. I'm afraid I don't have much to offer, but I can make coffee." No. He held up a gentle hand. "Please, sit with me a moment, and let me explain." And so Della sat, and the old man sat across from her, and he told her the truth. "My name," the old man began, "is Elias Warren." He said it as though the name should mean something, and after a moment, it did. Della's eyes widened slowly, because everyone in that part of the country knew the name Warren. There was hardly a town for 200 miles that did not have a Warren's on its main street, the warm, bright family diners with the bluebird on the sign, where 3 generations had gone for Sunday breakfast and slices of pie. Della had grown up eating at a Warren's. Half the country had. You own Warren's?" she said faintly. All of them. "I built them," Elias said quietly. "Every one. I opened the first with my own 2 hands more than 50 years ago, a little place no bigger than the diner where you found me, and my wife and I ran it together, and over a lifetime it grew into what it is now, hundreds of them." He looked down at his hands. "I am, I suppose, what people would call a wealthy man." Della could not speak. She thought of the meatloaf special, and the $20, and the frozen old man too ashamed to ask for help, and she could make no sense of it at all. "But I don't understand," she managed. "Last night you had nothing. You said you'd lost your wallet, your car." "That part was true," Elias said. "All of it was true. My car did break down, out on that highway, in the storm, and my wallet truly was gone. I must have dropped it in the snow when I got out to look at the engine. I had no phone that worked out there, and no money, and no way to prove to a soul who I was. For the first time in more years than I can count, Mrs. Hart, I was simply an old man alone in the cold, with nothing, no name that anyone knew, no money in my pocket, nothing to make the world treat me as anything but what I appeared to be." His voice grew soft. "And do you know, in all my wealth, in all my years, I had forgotten what that felt like, to be nobody, to need help and be too proud to ask for it." He was quiet a moment. "I want to tell you why I was even out on that road, alone, on the worst night of the year," he said. "Because it matters. Many years ago I had a daughter, my only child. Her name was Ellen, and she had a good and tender heart. Too tender, perhaps, for the hard man I was becoming as my business grew. I spent those years building my empire, Mrs. Hart, chasing more, and I told myself I was doing it all for my family, the way men do. But the truth is I was never home. I missed her whole childhood, chasing dollars I did not need. And when she grew up, she and I quarreled, over foolish things, the way proud people do. And we let the silence grow between us, year after year, each of us waiting for the other to reach out first." His eyes glistened. "And then, one winter, I lost her. She passed away, still estranged from me, before either of us ever found the words to make it right. And my wife followed her not long after. Of a broken heart, I have always believed." Della's own eyes filled. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I have spent the years since as a rich and lonely old man," Elias said, "rattling around in a life full of everything except the things that matter. Last night was the anniversary of my Ellen's passing. Every year on that night, I drive out alone to the little country churchyard where she rests, to sit with her a while. That is where I was going when my car failed me on that road." He looked up at Della. "So there I was, an old man, on the saddest night of his year, freezing and penniless and invisible, wandering into a diner with nowhere left to go, and a woman who had almost nothing herself looked at me, truly looked at me, when the whole world had stopped seeing me, and she gave me the last of what she had. She asked me for nothing. She did not know my name, or that I had a dime to it. She was simply kind, at real cost to herself, to a stranger who could give her nothing in return. He reached into his fine coat, and he drew out the torn, taped, worn-soft $20 bill, and he laid it gently on the table between them. "I have kept this," he said. "I am going to keep it for the rest of my life, because last night, Della Hart, when I was as low and as lost as I have ever been, you reminded me of something I had let myself forget. You reminded me of my Ellen. You reminded me that there is still real goodness in this world, the kind that gives when it hurts to give. And you gave me back something that all my money never could. You gave me back my hope." For a long moment, the two of them sat in that small, cold kitchen, and neither spoke. Then Elias Warren straightened, and something changed in him. The sorrow folded itself away, and in its place came the sharp, clear purpose of the man who had built an empire from a single diner. "Now," he said, "I am an old man, Mrs. Hart, and I have no children left to leave my life's work to. For years, I have been asking myself what it was all for, and who on this earth I could trust to carry it on. Someone who understands what those little diners were always truly about. Not the money, not the sign, but the warmth. The idea that anyone who walks in from the cold, whoever they are, will be seen and fed and treated like they matter." He looked at her steadily. "Last night, I watched you run that idea better, with an empty pocket, than most of my managers run it with every resource I can give them. So I am going to make you an offer, and I want you to hear me out before you say a word." Della's heart was pounding. "Mr. Warren, hear me out," he said gently. "First, the matter of tonight, and this week. I know an eviction notice when I see the look of one on a person's face." He nodded at the drawn worry she had carried since he walked in. "That is already taken care of, not as charity. I would never insult you with charity, Della. Consider it a signing bonus, paid in advance, for the job I am about to offer you. Your rent is settled. Your debts, the ones your husband left behind, that you have been carrying alone for 2 years, my people will help you clear them, properly and honestly. That weight comes off your shoulders today. You have carried it long enough." Della pressed a hand to her mouth. She could not have spoken if she'd tried. "And second," Elias went on, "the job itself. There is a Warren's in this very town, a good location, but it has been struggling under a manager who has forgotten what the place is for. I would like you to take it over, to run it, not as a waitress, Della, as the manager. And in time, if you do as well as I believe you will do, and I believe you will do very well indeed, as a partner." He smiled. "I will train you myself. It will not be easy. I will work you hard, and I will expect a great deal, because I do not hand my life's work to people who have not earned it. But I think you have been earning it your whole life. I think you have simply been waiting for a single door to open." He leaned forward. "I am not offering to save you, Mrs. Hart. A woman like you does not need saving. I am offering you a fair chance, the same fair chance I got 60 years ago, when someone believed in a nobody with nothing but a willing pair of hands. What you do with it will be entirely up to you." He held out his old, weathered hand. "So, will you take it?" And Della Hart, the tired, frightened, proud woman who 12 hours earlier had given away the last $20 in the world, looked at that outstretched hand, and she thought of her daughter asleep in the next room, and she thought of her Tom, and she thought of the long, cold road that had somehow, impossibly, led her here. And she reached out, and she took it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Mr. Warren. I'll take it, and I promise you, I will not let you down." "No," the old man said softly, holding her hand in both of his. "I don't believe you will." Now I have told you that this kindness changed everything by the next morning, and it did, but I want to be careful and honest with you about what changed, and what did not, because the truth is finer and better than any fairy tale. What changed the next morning was not that Della Hart became rich. That is not how real life works, and Elias Warren, of all people, knew it. What changed was that a door opened. What changed was that a woman who had been running as hard as she could just to stay in place was finally, at long last, given a road she could run forward on. The rest, all the rest, she earned with her own 2 hands, exactly as she'd promised. And oh, how she earned it. She took over the struggling little Warrens in town, and she poured herself into it the way she had poured herself into everything her whole life. Elias trained her, just as he'd said he would, and he was hard on her, just as he'd warned. But she never once complained, because she understood that his hardness was a form of respect. He was not treating her like a charity case. He was treating her like the successor to his life's work. And she rose to it. Within a year, the little diner that had been failing was thriving. Within 2, it was the busiest, warmest, most beloved gathering place in the whole town, because Della ran it the way Elias had dreamed all his diners would be run. She learned the name of every regular. She kept a booth in the corner that was always, quietly, free for anyone who came in from the cold with nothing in their pockets. She called it Elias's booth, though she never told most people why. She hired other single mothers, other folks the world had counted out, and she gave them the same fair chance she had been given. And the place ran, some said, on something warmer than electricity. And Lily, sweet Lily, grew up in that warm and bustling diner, doing her homework in a back booth after school, greeted by name by half the town, watching her mother stand tall and respected and unafraid. The cold little apartment above the shoe store became a warm little house with a garden. The worn-out coats became new ones, and the fear that had lived in Della's chest for so long, the fear of the envelope under the door, the fear of the empty table, slowly, finally, loosened its grip and let her go. As for Elias Warren, he did not fade back out of their lives once the papers were signed. He could not have, even if he'd wanted to. He came by the diner nearly every week, and he sat in his booth, and he ordered the meatloaf special, and he watched Della work with a light in his pale eyes that had not been there in many years. Lily took to calling him Grandpa Eli, and he answered to it gladly, and I do not think anything in his long life ever made him happier. The lonely old man who had rattled around in a life full of everything except the things that mattered had, at the very end of his road, been given a family again, not by blood, by kindness, which, as any old soul will tell you, is the stronger of the 2. He had lost a daughter, Ellen, long ago, to silence and to pride, and a stranger in a diner, asking nothing, had given him a second daughter in the winter of his life. That, he told Della once, was worth more than every dollar he had ever earned. And I believe he meant it. Elias Warren lived 7 more good years, happier years, by his own account, than all the rich and lonely ones that came before. And when at last his long life came to its gentle close and the reading of his affairs was done, it was discovered that the old man had left the bulk of his life's work, the diners, the whole warm empire of them, in the hands of the woman he had come to call his daughter, Della Hart. The waitress who had given him her last $20 on the coldest night of the year. There were some, of course, who called it luck. There always are. They said Della Hart had simply been in the right place at the right time, that anyone would have been made were they lucky enough to wait on a lonely billionaire in a snowstorm. But those people, I have always thought, entirely missed the point of the story. Because 100 other people could have waited on Elias Warren that night. 100 other people did wait on lonely, hurting strangers, in 100 other diners, on 100 other cold nights. The question was never whether the chance would come. The question was who would be the kind of person who reached into an empty pocket and gave anyway, when it cost them, when it frightened them, when every sensible voice said you cannot afford this. Della Hart was not made by luck. She was made by who she already was, on the night when no one was watching and there was nothing at all to gain. The fortune did not fall on her from the sky. It grew, like everything true grows, from a seed she planted herself, with her own trembling hand, in the coldest ground of her life. And so I will leave you tonight with the thing that Della herself came to understand, in the good and grateful years that followed, and that she used to tell her Lily, and later her Lily's children, whenever they gathered in that warm diner around Elias's booth. She would say, "I gave that old man $20 because it was the right thing to do, and for no other reason. I never expected a single thing in return. That is the only reason it counts. If I had known who he was, if I had given it hoping to be repaid, it would have been a business deal, and worth nothing. It was worth everything precisely because I gave it when I believed I was giving it away for good. She would take her grandchildren's small hands in her own, and she would say, "You will not always be able to give much. There will be seasons in your life when your own hands are near empty. But those, my darlings, are the very seasons when your kindness matters most. Anyone can be generous when it is easy. Give when it is hard. Give when it frightens you. Give when you have counted your last $20 and there is a mountain in front of you. Because you never, ever know. You cannot possibly know what a single act of kindness will set in motion in this world. It may change a stranger's whole life. It may, in time, change your own. The last $20 in the world. It did not buy bread that week, as Della had planned. It bought something far greater. It bought a lonely man his hope, and a grieving man a family, and a struggling woman a future, and a little girl a lifetime of proof that her mother's heart was the truest thing she would ever know. That is what kindness does when it is real. It gives away the little it has, and it changes everything. And if you are listening tonight, and your own hands feel empty, and the mountain in front of you looks too high to ever climb, I hope you will remember Della Hart, and the coldest night of the year, and the old man in the corner booth. Remember that the smallest kindness, given at the hardest moment, has a power in it that no amount of money can buy. You may never know what your own act of grace will set in motion, but give it anyway. Give it anyway.